In this video, you will learn all the basics of creating your own brushes in Procreate. I know you're short on time, so I'll keep it relatively short and easy, sticking with the most important features you can adjust, so you'll be creating brushes in no time. Now first, we'll start with how you can create a new brush. How do you need to start? First, you need to go to your brush menu. That's the little brush, of course. And now you can either go to any of the brush packs and just tap the plus here at the top to start making your own brush from scratch. Another thing you can do is just pick a random brush, any brush that Procreate already has, and you can slide to the left, tap duplicate, and then tap that brush and start adjusting that brush that is already in there. Now once you have created some brushes, you can move them around by just tapping and holding them. And you can move the brushes around in the pack itself, or you can tap and hold it and then scroll through your brush packs and then drop it somewhere else. Now you probably don't want these brushes to end up in those standard Procreate brush packs. So what you can do is go all the way to the top. And then here, when you scroll down a little bit further, you'll also see this plus. And when you tap that, you won't be creating a new brush, but a new brush set. And you can name it anything you like Flow. That's a nice name. And then you can drop brushes in there, or you can tap the plus here and start creating your own brushes from scratch in that brush pack. Now to get started with creating brushes, you'll need to understand the difference between shape and grain. These are the two main features in your Procreate brush. Now the shape is the shape of the brush. You can compare it to a stamp. A stamp has a certain shape, or a crayon has a certain shape. It's round or square. That's the shape of the brush. And then there's grain, and the grain is the texture that will be applied by that shape. So playing around with these two things will give you a super wide variety of possibilities creating Procreate brushes. But we'll start with shape. Now to pick your shape, you need to go to Make Sense to Shape in your Brush Studio. And then you can tap Edit over here. Right now, our stamp, our shape is a circle. Now we can tap Edit. And then you can go to Import here and then pick Source Library. And there you'll find a whole bunch of stamps, a whole bunch of shapes that Procreate already put in there. And you can pick any shape you like. I would highly recommend just experimenting with brushes, with creating your own brushes. And let's say we want to create something with maybe some rough edges. We could go for blotch, for instance, and then tap Done. And now we have our shape. Now there's a whole bunch of settings that you can apply to shape. First, we'll go to Stroke Path. Now here you can adjust the spacing of your brush, and that means the spacing like between your stamps. So if you turn this up, you will see the stamps of your brush, the individual stamps. And if you lower it, then it will just be a smooth brush stroke. Now let me just set it to like 6, somewhere close to what it was. And then we have jitter, and when you turn that up, it will make like this scattering effect, scattering your brush stamps, your shapes. Now let me turn that down again. And then we have fall off, and that means like the paint falls off. You make a stroke, but it stops eventually. It's like you have run out of paint. So if you turn that up, you'll have very little paint, and if you turn it down, you will have unlimited paint. Then some more settings you can apply are under Stabilization. Pretty obvious. With this, you can stabilize your brush strokes. So if you tend to create wobbly lines, then these are very useful. Now, if you turn up the streamline amount, this will just smooth out any wobbles in your line. And with pressure, that will make sure that, well, like an Apple Pencil has pressure sensitivity. So if you press harder, for instance, for some brushes, if you press harder, your brush stroke will become thicker. And sometimes it's hard to like control that pressure. But if you turn up pressure here, that that transition from less pressure to more pressure will be more gradual. Then we have stabilization. Now that takes a moving average of your stroke and it'll smooth out more if you make a fast brush stroke. So you see, sometimes it's too much. It smooths out too much. So be careful with that. Don't turn it up too much. Now, instead of stabilization, you could use motion filtering, and that uses a more advanced algorithm, also smoothing out any wobbles, but not taking the speed into account. And if you feel like once you have turned that up, then let me just erase this, clear the drawing pad here. Over here, you can test any of your brushes. But if you feel like it has lost the expression, then you can turn up expression. Or, well, it'll remove some expression. You can play around with this to decide how much expression you want in your brush strokes. Then we'll also take a quick look at the settings under shape. You'll find some over here as well. I'll guide you through a few. For instance, we have rotation. That's the rotation of your shape. Now, if you turn this up, it'll rotate your brush shape. And if you turn it all the way to the right, it'll follow the stroke. So if you make that movement, that shape will follow that movement. Then we have scatter. If you turn that up, you will get this random rotation of your shape. So you can turn it all the way up and it'll have this random effect. And if you would like more of those stamps in your stroke, then you can turn up the count and it will just give you more stamps in your stroke. And you can also jitter that if you want a random effect. And here at the bottom, you'll find some options to also change the shape of your brush. Now, right now, you could compare our brush shape to a circle. It's still perfectly round, but with this setting over here, we can adjust that. We can rotate it by using the green handle, and we can squish our shape by using these blue handles. And right now it looks very, very weird with the scatter turned on. Well, let's set these to 0. Now our brush is like flat. Now we can make it rounded again, rounded or flat, using this setting. Or you could set it to your pressure or the tilt of your brush, of your pen. But these are all more like advanced settings. We have covered the basics of what you can do with your shape now. So I'd like to move on to grain. So let's move on to grain. What grain does is add texture to your brush stroke. So we already have the shape. Now we are going to pick a texture. We can tap edit here at the top. Then we'll go to import again and go to the source library. And here you'll find a whole bunch of textures you can use. Procreate, put them in here. Let's see what we can use. Let's just go for clay, but you can pick anything. Now we have our texture, and we can tap done. And now you'll see two options under grain behavior. You have the option moving and the option texturized. Now the difference between these two is, well, the way Procreate explains it themselves is that when you use moving, it's like you have your texture applied to a paint roller. And you use that paint roller and it'll apply the texture on your canvas. So in this case, with moving, you could make the texture move a bit. You could drag it around. But when you set it to textured, you can imagine that the texture, the grain is behind your brushstroke. So the texture will remain the same. It's like painting on a canvas or whatever texture. The texture is there and you're painting on there. Now, another few interesting settings, especially under moving, are like the movement. Right now it's at rolling, but if you slide to the left, your texture will get dragged on your canvas more. You can also adjust the scale. That will just make your grain bigger or smaller. And you can also adjust the zoom. And that means right now it's at cropped. So the texture will always remain the same. The size will stay the same. But if you go all the way to the left, it will follow the size. the size of your brush. So if you have a very small brush size, the texture will also be small, but if you make your brush very big, the texture will also get bigger. Now for your texture, you can also adjust the rotation, rotating that image that we have here, and you can increase or decrease the depth. So that's how visible your texture will be. If you set it at a very low percentage, your texture will be less visible, but if you set it to max, that's like full visibility of your texture. Now we have discussed the shape and the grain of your brush. We have a third pillar when it comes to Procreate Brush creation, and that's the brush behavior. So we have our little stamp, we have our texture on our paint roller, and now we want to decide how our brush or how our paint roller will behave. And of course we want it to behave well. So let's go to rendering. That's where we can decide how light or heavy our brush stroke will be. And there's just this scale with a light glaze. You can see it. You have a very light glaze of your brush. It's nice for more like watercolor brushes. And if you go down, it'll get heavier and heavier until you're at intense blending, which is great for oil painting brushes, for instance. It's intense. Now you can also adjust the flow of your brush. Now the flow is like the amount of paint that comes off your brush. You can also add wet edges, and that will give the effect of like pigment spreading to the sides of your brush strokes, like in watercolor. So you can use that, or you can use burned edges, and that gives some dark edges around your brush stroke, especially when you make multiple strokes on top of each other. Let me just turn these down. And other interesting features to adjust the behavior of your brush are under wet mix. And this is great if you want to create some painterly brushes. First, we have dilution, and that's how much water is in your brush. Not real water, of course, but if you turn that up, it will get, like your brush stroke will become more transparent, more watery, really for that natural media look. Then we have charge. Charge is how much paint is on your brush. So if you have a low charge, you will run out of paint as you make strokes. Then we have attack, and attack is how much of your paint sticks to your canvas. So you could have a lot of charge, you could have a lot of paint on your brush, but if you have a low attack, it won't stick to the canvas, not that much. Then we have pull, and pull is the amount of drag, of how much your brush, how much your paint will drag through other colors, and that will really give an organic effect. It's nice to be able to blend on your canvas, mix colors as you go. That's what you need pull for. These are the 4 features I'd like to play with the most. You also have grade. That is a way to increase the chunkiness and contrast of your brush. And then blur, that kind of makes sense. It makes your brush stroke more blurry. And here you can also set blur and wetness to jitter if you would like a more random, like surprising effect. Next up are color dynamics. These are also a lot of fun to play around with. Now you have stamp color jitter, stroke color jitter, and color pressure. And they all have, well, and also color tilt and color barrel roll in case you have bought a Apple Pencil Pro, which I don't have. But we have all these same options. Now, stamp color jitter means that you can make the color jitter for each stamp. You remember the different stamps of our brush. Now, each of the stamps in your stroke will have a different color. At least if you turn up the hue, and let's grab a color here. You can just grab a color for your pad here. So you can see that every stamp in your stroke has a different hue because we have turned up the hue jitter. But you can also jitter the saturation, the lightness, darkness, or use the secondary color in Procreate. Now for stroke jitter, if you turn that up, then every stroke that you make will have a different color or a different amount of saturation, lightness, darkness, or use the secondary color. And when you use this with color pressure, then it gets decided by the amount of pressure that you put on your pen. So this can also give very nice effects. And then we have tilt. Let me turn this down. If you use tilt, then it gets decided by the tilt of your pen. So if you lay it down flat, you will get a different color than when you use the tip of your pen. Then finally, just a few more features that I think are important when you are starting on creating brushes in Procreate. Let's go to Apple Pencil. This is very important when you have an Apple Pencil. Here you can set different settings to the amount of pressure that you put on your pen or the angle that you use your pen on. So right here, right now it's set to opacity. So low pressure will get a more like transparent strokes, and more pressure gives more opaque strokes. Like less pressure, transparent, more pressure, more opaque. Now you can also set this to size. If you turn this up, low pressure will give you a thin stroke and more pressure will give you a thick stroke. Same goes for flow. Now this is the amount of paint that comes off. Works a little bit the same as opacity. Or bleed will also give you interesting effects. Makes it look more like a dry brush. Gives a nice chunky look. And over here you can do the same things, but then for the tilt of your pen. And finally, let's move on to properties. Over here you have some basic properties like how you want your brush to look as a preview in your brush menu. You can set it to stamp preview, which in this case is not very useful because we have created more like a chalky brush and you don't want to see the stamp, you want to see the stroke. But if you turn that on, you will see the stamp as a preview. And we have orient to screen, and we can actually turn that off. That way the brush will, well, the way it looks depends on how you have oriented your screen. So if you have it vertically, it'll behave differently than when you have placed it horizontally. Preview size also makes sense, how big your brushstroke is in your preview little window in your brush menu. And smudge pull, that's an interesting one. If you want to use your brush as the smudge tool, this decides how much your smudge tool will pull the paint across your canvas. So if you are working on a smudge brush, a brush that is intended for smudging, then this is also an important setting. And over here we have brush behavior. You can set the maximum and minimum size, maximum opacity and minimum opacity that your brush can have. So if you would turn down the maximum opacity, you can never use that brush at the full opacity. You can never have a fully opaque brush stroke in that case. And then finally, once you have played around with all of these settings, of course, I would suggest playing around with your brush and going to your canvas and then playing around with it over there, because you never know how it really behaves. Like the preview window is nice, but it's great to just go ahead and play with your brushes. And then once you're happy, go back to that brush menu, then to About This Brush, give your brush a name, like a name. You can add a little photo of yourself or whatever. You can add anything there, or a logo. You can add your name, and finally you can sign your brush. And then you can tap done, and then you can start sharing your brush with your friends, family, neighbors, I don't know, or share it in the Procreate community. That would be really great if Flow creators start sharing their own brush creations. And you can do that by sliding to the left and then tapping share. And then you can email it, airdrop it, whatever, put it in Dropbox, Google Drive, and share it that way. And the same goes for brush packs. You can tap it and then tap share to share your amazing creations. All right, let's put some of these things into practice and create a brush. So you go to your brush menu, you tap the plus, and then first let's pick a shape. We'll go to Edit, then to Import, then to Source Library, and let's pick something fun. I was thinking maybe we can use lightning. Then let's tap done. And first I want to turn up the spacing for these lightning bolts. Let's turn it up so we can see the individual bolts. Let's also turn up the jitter so there's some randomness. Then go back to shape. Then let's flip X. That way it will flip randomly. We can turn up the scatter a bit so they rotate a bit. And we can also turn up the count a bit. That way we have more lightning bolts in one stroke. Then for our grain, let's go to Edit, then to Import, then to Source Library. Then let's scroll down and let's see. I think Bad Spray would be nice. Let's just use that, then tap Done. Now I don't want the opacity of the brush to change, so we can go to Apple Pencil and turn opacity down. And I do want the size to go up as I use more pressure, so we can turn up size. You can go to max or like maybe like 70%. Let's also add some color dynamics. Let's go there and let's make every single lightning bolt a different color, slightly different color. We can use stamp color jitter and turn up hue and set it to like 11%. And then all we need to do is give our brush a name. Just go here, double tap. Let's name it Lightning. I'll give it a logo, add my name, and I'll sign it. Then let's tap Done. And then let's check out our brush. Let's make our background dark. Let's go to our layer menu, make a dark background, and use a nice yellow color. And then let's check out our brush. I'm not sure what I would use it for, but I like it. Have fun creating your own brushes, and I'll see you next time.